Fruity Knitting. I'm Andrew.
And I'm Andrea.
This is episode 108. Fruity Knitting is a 90-minute program that brings you knitting inspiration from around the world, together with little snippets of travel, history, and other stories to hopefully put a smile on your face and bring a little extra joy to your day. We're just back from the island of Fanø in Denmark, so it's a really special program that we've got for you, and we've got heaps of interesting stuff to share with you today.
We do. So the Fanø Knitting Festival is a major festival in Europe, and this year was going to be its 15th anniversary. And as we know, it's been a crazy year due to the coronavirus, with most festivals being cancelled. And the Fanø Knitting Festival was also cancelled, but only very late. And since we had booked our accommodation and prepared a lot of interviews, we still decided to drive up to Denmark and just do the interviews that we could, because some of them were going to be with the locals anyway. And there were also other knitters who, like us, had booked accommodation and just decided to go anyway. So in the end, it ended up a little bit like a mini festival, because there was plenty of knitters walking around on the streets and just knitting in the alfresco cafe. So that was really cool. So our goal was to bring back really good footage that would give you as viewers a strong sense of what it would actually be like to go to the Fanø Knitting Festival. And I think we've done that.
Yeah. So the Fanø Festival really reminded us of Shetland Wool Week, because it is much more than just a marketplace with classes and lectures on the side. It is really a cultural experience, which is great. If you visit, you will get to meet the local community and mix with them, and you get to enjoy the stunning landscape of the region. We've come back with far more footage and material than we can fit into one show, so you'll be getting a great taste of Fanø over the next few episodes.
Yeah, but for this episode, we've put together a 20-minute collage of our impressions and experiences on Fanø, and it's all the kinds of things that you would see or do if you went to the Fanø Knitting Festival. Of course, on top of that, by a real festival, you would get the marketplace and lectures and classes and a fashion show, etc., which we unfortunately couldn't film because it wasn't there. Yep. Also in this episode, we've got a fun interview with Crystal Seyfarth, who together with her husband is the organiser of the Fanø Knitting Festival. And during this interview, Crystal takes us on a tour of her shop, and we go through a lot more of her very colourful designs together. So I think you're going to really enjoy that. On top of that, we have some new purchases, which we're obviously very keen to show you. And we're going to start a new knit along. So I think that's all we've got. It's a good program, a good full program for you today.
Yep.
Okay, now, every time we go to a festival, we are usually so taken up with the film production that we get very little time to actually do any knitting. And for the very first week, I don't think either of us did a stitch of knitting.
No way.
And you not much for the second week either. Yeah. So unfortunately, we don't have a lot of progress to show you on both of our own projects. But and the other thing is we're really keen to get on and show this collage and talk about our own experience of Fanø. But it is a knitting show, so I'll just quickly give you an update on my Paisley Copter. So here's a picture of the design, just to remind you. It's by the Norwegian designer Sissel Høyevik. And Sissel's made the original design, a very tailored fitting jacket that goes down to around your mid-hips. And the back and the sleeves have a checkered stranded pattern, which is very easy to knit because it's easy to memorize and you don't have to weave in any floats. And the front has panels of a lovely paisley pattern, which you add embroidery and sequins on later when the garment's completely knitted. And this design comes in two colorways, and you can buy the pattern together with the wool in a kit from Sissel's web shop. Now, this is the other design that I've knitted by Sissel, and you've seen me wear it a lot, and I really love it. I think it's one of my most successful garments. And I really love the modifications that I've done on this. I think because of the modifications, I wear it a lot. It goes well with my wardrobe. So I've decided to do the same modifications on this one as well. So this one's also going to be a cropped jacket sitting just in the waist, and I'll probably also add a little collar to it. And I'm planning on telling you exactly how I do those modifications in a future episode, but we've got a really full program today, haven't we?
There's no space today.
No space for me to talk about that. But I do want to just really quickly talk about a couple of the challenges that I've had so far with the project. And the main challenge has been with gauge. Now, as most of you know, I rarely knit to the pattern's recommended gauge, and it's just because I find that I keep wanting the fabric to be a little bit firmer. and so I am used to recalculating the maths to fit my own gauge. But what I wasn't aware of was that I was getting a different gauge on the checkered pattern, which is on the back, than I was on the Paisley pattern, which is on the front. And it is knitted in the round. So in one round, you're doing both patterns. Now, with my initial swatch, I swatched on both patterns, the checkered one and the Paisley together. And they were fine. They were both the same gauge.
How big was your swatch?
Fairly big.
How wide? Was it a 10 centimetres? Because 10 centimetres...
It was a bit more than 10 centimetres. Yeah. Okay, so it's a little bit more than 10 centimetres wide and more than 10 centimetres high. But over a large period, a large bit of fabric, what I found is that the checkered pattern is tending to pull in a little bit and just become a tighter gauge. So whereas my Paisley pattern on the front was just getting perfect measurements for what I wanted, it was turning out just right, the checkered pattern on the back was just slightly too narrow. And you can even see...
Yeah, it's creeping round.
Yeah, the Paisley pattern is kind of creeping around to the back because the back is pulling it in.
You have got the same number of stitches on the front and the back.
Yeah. So this could be a problem peculiar to the way I knit. But I have spent a lot of time thinking about this and trying to figure out what is actually going on. And I have a theory. So I've developed a theory, and I'm going to show you now a picture of my knitting up close. So you'll see the checkered and the Paisley pattern up close. And hopefully this will help me explain my theory in a clear way. So on the right is the front Paisley pattern, and on the left is the back checkered pattern. And this is my theory now. So I think that a lot of traditional Fair Isle patterns have plenty of diagonal lines within the actual pattern. And this is important because the tension is created between the foreground motif yarn and the background yarn at the points in the row when the yarns change over. So diagonal lines of colour within a pattern will distribute this tension by varying the changeover points of the yarn from one row to the next. And this makes the fabric a lot more elastic. So on the right, you can see that the Paisley pattern is similar to this. It doesn't have diagonal lines, but the changeover points are a lot more random and they don't line up vertically from one row to the next. Whereas patterns with vertical lines or small blocks of colour, like the checkered pattern on the left, are less elastic because the changeover points are just too consistent. So the colour changes from one row to the next are so consistent that the fabric, in a way, starts to act a little bit like ribbing and starts to pull in a bit. So that's my theory, and I think it's a good one.
It's good to have a theory at least.
It is. I think it makes sense. Okay, so how do you solve that problem? It's actually fairly easy to solve. Now, obviously, if you were going to do it in pieces, then you just simply do the back on a different size needle to the front. But you can also do that knitting in the round. What you just need is...
I know how you do it. 2
sets of needles. 2 sets of needles. So, for instance, you would have the back on a 3.75 millimetre needle. All those stitches would be held on that. And when you came to knitting around the round, you'd get your second needle of 3.75 millimetres and you'd knit across it. And then you would have your 3.5 millimetre needle on the Paisley stitches, holding the Paisley stitches at the front, and you would get your second 3.5 millimetre needle and knit across that. So it's a very easy solution to getting the back the same gauge as the front.
That's not an easy solution at all. That's very complicated. The easy solution is you, at the end of your half row, you unscrew your, what do they call them? You unscrew your needle from the cable. You're interchangeable. And then you screw on your 3.75.
And add on an extra 15 minutes to each row.
Yeah.
Yeah.
It's not about speed, does.
Okay. Anyway, so the problem for me is that I didn't realise I was having this problem until I did a lot of knitting. And so I've decided, before I undid anything, I thought, oh, look, maybe I can just wet block it and stretch out the back. It should be the same size that I wanted. And I did do that, but over time, like I did that a good week ago, and over time it does, come back to how it wants to be. So what I might end up doing is just rip back to the armholes and then do a quarter-size needle higher on the upper part, on the upper body, because thank God the checkered pattern is on the back, because as women we do need extra width across the chest. But I don't want to be like this with my back too narrow. So because you do this and you want your shoulders to be able to curve. Yeah. So yeah, that I might end up doing that. But I didn't actually realize this problem, or I didn't figure out this theory until I started on my sleeve. So here's my sleeve here. And so to show you how I figured this out, here's a picture up close of the cuff. And if you look at the cuff, you can see that the blue and pink stripes and the Paisley section in between have the same stitch count and they use the same needle size. But the section of the blue and pink stripes actually wants to pull in tighter. And I saw this by looking closely at pictures of other people's work on Ravelry. So what I decided to do was to knit my pink and blue stripes on a 3.75 millimeter needle and the Paisley part in the middle on a 3.5 millimeter needle. And the result is that my cuff is now looking fairly straight and even. You can see that it wants to pull in a little bit, but it would have been way worse if I'd done it all on the same needle size. Okay, so that's my theory, and whether it's correct or not, it works for me.
The other solution would be to turn this checkered pattern diagonally, which would look cool.
Yeah.
And then you wouldn't have these stacked squeezing stitches.
That could be true.
Yes. So there you go.
That could be true.
God, I'm amazed she didn't throw that one out. So rip it back and do that.
That could be true. That could be interesting.
Yeah.
Okay, so it's your turn. Show us your progress.
Yeah, here's my progress. Now, I have to say, it doesn't look like much, but after the last episode where I showed the completed back piece, there were a lot of very lovely comments saying how excellently smooth and even my stocking stitch was. Possibly that went to my head because I did do a little bit on my front piece here and it went through quality control, and Andrea said that, using her very technical terminology, it was lumpy bumpy and it had to all be ripped out.
Yeah, because he started to row out on knit rows. Now,
I don't know how you row out on knit rows.
I know. Rowing out in a purl, okay.
Anyway.
But you're not allowed to do it on a knit.
It didn't pass quality control. So people asked, how did I get such excellent smooth knitting? Well, that's one way that you get excellent smooth knitting.
You rip it out and do it again.
If it's no good, it gets thrown away. So there we go. So actually all of that is new.
And it's looking good.
It is now looking good. I think I'd lost my rhythm somehow.
I think it went to your head. You got too excited. Or maybe you just started increasing your speed with your flicking.
Could be.
Do you reckon?
Yep. Anyway.
So coming up now is our 20-minute collage on our impressions and experiences on Fanø. But we want to just talk about a few things first so that what you see in the collage will make more sense to you. And we had a fantastic time, really.
Yeah.
I enjoyed myself more than I expected to, which was great, really great. So the actual knitting festival itself, I think, goes for about 4 days, but most people will turn up and stay for at least a week just to make good use of the island. And to get to Fanø, you need to take a ferry from the mainland, which only takes about 12 minutes. And you'll see quite a lot of people coming on foot or with their bike. We drove our car on, and there were actually a few cars with caravans. And we just love islands. We think they're very special, and it always feels like when you're taking a boat ride, it's like the official start of an adventure. And we also had amazing weather. I was actually expecting it to be more like Shetland, so pretty windy and rainy and around 14 or 15 degrees Celsius, but it was really calm.
It was amazing.
It was incredibly calm. It was very clear blue skies. And on one of the days, it was so warm that we could have even gone swimming. Yep.
So it was amazing, and we've got drone footage to show you. When we got off the boat, one of the first things that struck me was just how beautiful the houses are, and it's really extraordinary. Most of the houses on Fanø have been preserved in the traditional Fanø style, which is just really beautiful. You'll see lots of footage in the clip coming up. When we take footage for the show, we try not to take too much because ultimately it's just hard to handle. we went out one afternoon to take pictures of the houses. Andrea came back with, I think it was 112 separate clips of houses because they're just kind of irresistible. Yeah. So that's
I spent a bit of time looking at the real estate.
That too, yeah. Inside the houses, it's also really interesting. Often on the walls, they'll have these beautiful old tiles. We've actually collected some pictures of these to show you. These tiles are up to 300 years old, so they're from the 1700s. The really old ones you can recognize because they're actually more intricate, and that's because they're hand painted. So they'll have more detailed designs and there are more different colors on the tiles. The newer ones, and there we're talking about 200 years old, they're simpler, and that's because they started to mass produce them. So simpler designs and fewer colors. These tiles were actually brought from the Netherlands to Fanø, and they were put into the ships when they were returning without any cargo. So they were put right in the bottom of the ship and they acted as ballast. So they were balancing the ship when it was otherwise empty as it came through the rough North Sea. So a really interesting story there. We also visited the churches on the island, and one tradition that we'd never seen before is inside the churches, they have these beautiful model ships hanging from the ceiling of the church.
It's exceptional.
They're really stunning. Again, these are around 300 years old, some of them.
Yeah.
They're called votive ships, and they were often given to the church by sailors who'd been rescued from a shipwreck. So they're an offering of thanks. Really stunning, amazing models. So again, you'll see some pictures of that coming up. We stayed very close to the beach, actually on the west side of the island. It's a huge beach. It's the widest beach in Northern Europe. The sand is really firm. So people on the island actually drive on the beach, which is a really different thing for us as Australians. There's even a bus stop on the sand on the beach. On a few mornings, there was a group of Danish knitters who would gather on the beach to sing Danish folk songs. We were told that everyone in Denmark sings, and they still love their folk songs. So I thought this was a really great tradition to get out, in a knitting festival, get out on the sand in the fresh air amongst the birds and the sand and all the scenery and sing songs. So.
So you'll see footage of that as well.
Yeah.
And the biggest highlight for me, for sure, was being dressed up in the traditional Fanø costume. I loved it. I love history. I love costume. I love dressing up. So I was in heaven. Now, the major festival in Fanø is called Fanø, and it happens every year in July. And it's a traditional festival where all the locals dress up in traditional costumes and they dance special music to their traditional, they dance special dances to their traditional music, and they just celebrate their customs and eat the traditional food. So the Fanø Association has a really large collection of costumes, I think around 250. And some of the pieces of the costumes could even be in museum pieces because, again, they're around 200, or 150 years old.
Yeah.
So the costumes in themselves are so interesting and beautiful that we planned a special segment or interview just on them, which we're going to show you in a future episode. But preparing for that and setting up and filming it ended up taking a full day, and as a consequence we ended up with a lot more extra footage than we'd planned on. And so we've included some of that in today's collage for you to see. So what you're going to see is me getting dressed up with one of the local ladies who's a real expert on the costumes. And as she's dressing me, she's explaining what she's doing, because the way the costumes are worn has to be very precise because it gives a lot of information about the wearer. So down to, for instance, if you have one of your buttons undone, a certain button undone, it'll say whether or not you're married, or the way your headscarf is folded has to be very exact. And that also tells you, are you from the south or are you from the north? So all of these little interesting old customs that were very important are kept in the modern knowledge and preserved and valued, which is great. Now, for the interview, which you're going to see in a future episode, 6 other locals turn up in different costumes. Either they're slightly different because they might represent somebody in a different stage of their life or whatever. So, and the girl who was going to turn up to be dressed up as the bride didn't show up. So, of course, I put my hand up and I volunteered and I became a 50-year-old bride, which is fun. I felt very young and youthful and happy. So, I also got a special bridal headdress sewn on to my head. And this procedure actually takes about an hour normally, because the whole thing has to be sewn very tightly into your hair. And the reason why it's sewn in is these wedding festivals and other festivals would often go on for about 12 hours and wouldn't end to literally 8 or 9 in the morning. And all night long they would be dancing, and they're quite vigorous dancers. Yep. So the bride had to have her headpiece, which she only wears once in her life, really tightly secured so she looks great the whole evening. So you'll see that as well, and that's a lot of fun. But from a personal perspective, it was just such a great experience. It's great to be wearing these beautiful traditional costumes, so that's a privilege in itself, but also to be dressed in them. It was eerie. It was an eerie sensation. It really transported you back to a previous era.
Yeah.
And that was a very special experience for me.
Yeah, it's amazing to see those skills being carried on. It's really beautiful.
Yeah.
So, the music that you're going to hear in this episode, Andrea mentioned the celebrations that they have, very important. We've got music from a traditional Fanø band called Yesuivers, and I think they are very active in playing at festivals and celebrations like that. It's great music, fiddle and piano accordion and that sort of thing.
And their details, like all things on the show, are in the program notes. So if you want to check them out.
In the program notes. And we are really grateful that they gave us permission to use that music. The name Yesuivers actually is Fanø dialect for the drinkers.
That's us.
Which leads us on to our next point here. Fanø does have its very own craft brewery. It's called Fanø Bryghus, so the brewing house, and they produce a special beer in honour of the knitting festival each year. It's called Knitwit, and here's the beautiful label, and here is the beer.
It's a cool name, Knitwit.
Knitwit, absolutely. You can see it's a red beer. It's actually a wheat beer, but it's also brewed with berries, which you can smell and you can most definitely taste. It's very drinkable.
I'm not a beer drinker, but I tried four of their beers, and I was so impressed.
They are really good.
They're really good.
Really good. Yeah. So we didn't have any influence over this, but we can say this is literally a fruity knitting beer.
Yeah.
So we're going to enjoy a sip of this, and you can enjoy our really great Fanø collage, and we'll see you very shortly at the other side.
So the first thing you have to do is to take up your hair in a big bunch.
In a big bunch?
Yeah.
On the top of the head?
On top of the head.
Okay.
Oh, it's fine.
Fine.
Is that good?
Yeah, that's good. Yeah, very good. The first thing you're going to have is a white piece of clothes. That is to protect the scarves and the hat you are going to wear. And this you can wash if you want to. That they did in the old days. And your hair is also going to, yeah, that was fine. Taken away. So, and up again. And then you are going to wear a hat. Try to touch it. It's really
thick.
Yeah.
Yeah, it's stiff here.
And stiff, yeah. So now you're going to wear a hat. And that is in this piece your hair is now sitting. Tied up in there. Looking sweet. And a scarf. It was really fantastic. These are very old, maybe 200 years old.
Wow.
And they come from the Far East. The sailors brought them home. And then you could say green one day or purple another day.
Is it silk?
It's silk and cotton.
Silk and cotton.
Yeah. From the back side you can see if the girl is coming from the northern part of the island or the southern part. But now you have the dress on from the northern part, so we will do as we do up here north. That was the first part of it. And then from the front again. You can't sit like this the whole day. Lifting up like this. And what is going to do your face best. A little more up. Like that. And then it is turned one time at the neck. Ears should be covered. And up here. And on the side it should be really so laying flat. So, and you are wearing your finest ball dress, so to say. So these ends, two ends up there, you can't see it now.
Yeah.
And when you have wearing your finest dress, you have to put them really fine. At home for every day you could maybe just let them hang a little more. But here it should be really up. It's like going to the hairdresser. If you are from the southern part, the backside would look like this. It's a sail from a sailing ship. It refers to a sailing ship. But in Nordby, here up north, it's done like this. Put aside. This is what you call it, the back of the sailing ship, where it's the back side of the sailing ship. It's really flat, like that. And now the neck. Also a little piece of white clothes. And the... Hvad siger du?
Ja, den flotte på.
Yeah, yeah. And the neck scarf. You first of all do like that. So you can see like that. Yeah. And then you turn it into the neck.
Okay.
Now you have great colors on you. Around the neck. with a little needle, and then the last piece. Also around the neck, and with a piece of jewelry.
So did the women never show their hair?
No, never.
Just girls?
No.
Not even children?
No.
Okay.
Yeah, no. And if you had some hair coming out here, it's just telling you're not doing it correct.
Yeah.
You are a little bit lazy.
Floppy, yeah.
Like that.
Yeah.
The costumes was really just simple. Not so much silver and stuff, and really quite simple, but in a way beautiful.
Yeah, beautiful materials.
Yeah.
And edging. And
yes, edging and something like stuff like that. Final stuff for the fine dress will be the belt, and on the side you will have. This is something from your wedding you got as a gift, and then you are carrying it on your very fine dress. Only then.
Okay.
Yes, this is very special too.
So this is the best dress.
This is the best dress. Yeah. Green skirt, maybe black.
What have I got? I've got a green skirt.
You have a dark green skirt with a green button.
Yeah.
Yeah. In yourself.
Yeah. It's gorgeous looking, isn't it?
Yeah.
Den skal jeg simpelthen have med. Nu er det jo 1 million år siden, jeg er gået på efterskole. Men morgen, hvor vi...
Yeah, my name is Jane, and I'm come from Odense, and I have been here in Fanø Strikkefestival 3 times. And I love to come here because you can see Danish designers and try their designs on and feel the yarn. And this sweater I'm wearing is from a Danish designer. I have knit it myself, and the designer is Hanne Falkenberg. Yeah, it's very cozy. Yeah.
And my name is Hannah, and I'm from Copenhagen. And I've been to Fanø Strikkefestival once. And I'm knitting on a sweater by a designer called Helga Isager. And it's inspired by hønsestrik, which translates into chicken knitting. And it's a style of knitting that originated in the late 60s, beginning of the 70s, from the feministic movement, where they would knit in bold statements or different patterns that they would repeat in a row. And then, this is inspired from there. And I love coming here, being with friends and family and just talking about knitting and getting inspired by all the other knitwear that people are wearing. Yeah.
Yay! Okay, my name is Kathleen. I came from Germany, from Wolfsburg, and I wear a jacket. It is inspired from Night Shift from Andrea Mori, and I knit it myself. And I'm the first time on Fanø, and the first time at Strikkefestival that is cancelled.
Hi, I'm Monika. I'm from Germany too, from Berlin. I'm here on Fanø the second time. My jacket I made myself. It's from Kluge Strickart. I like Fanø and I like knitting, and so I come every year to Fanø.
My name is Helle. I'm from the Danish Style. I've been to Fanø Knitting Festivals 2 years before, and this time it was cancelled this year, so I've got a pop-up instead. The yarn that I use is Gotland yarn. It's from a local Danish spinning mill, and it's actually from the island where Hans Christian Andersen grew up. I'm dyeing with acid dyes, but because I dye on like grey yarn bases and off-white yarn bases, it can often look like it's plant dyed. It isn't, but it's those muted colors that I can create. And the Gotland yarn is all from local sheepholders, and the Gotland has a quality or it's got that shiny look to it, so it gives something extra when you knit with it. I think it just pops out the colors really, really nicely. I'm here with my sister Alice Sophia, who is the nature printer in the family. She does all this nature printing where she collects leaves in the Danish nature and the meadows, and the technique is to put the imprint of the leaves over to a merino woven fabric, where she is very much into how she designs it. So nothing is in coincidence. It's a very thoughtful process to make all these different patterns. Some of them are very graphic, others are more like in flow. So she makes knitting bags, really good for knitters. She makes shawls like this one. And you can also get scarves like with the prints.
back. Wasn't that fun? We've been having fun while you've been watching.
Yep.
We've been drinking through our Nitwit beer. So I hope that gave you a bit of a sense of what the Fanø Knitting Festival would be like if you decide to attend one year. And we're only able to produce this show thanks to the ongoing support of patrons. And we do aim for every episode to have really high quality content, which does take a lot of work. So we're also relying on the people who are watching to make a contribution. And it only takes a small monthly contribution to become a patron. And when we're talking about a small monthly contribution, we're talking about the price of a coffee, maybe a Starbucks coffee, but the price of a coffee, which is way less than what you would pay for a magazine, and we think that our episodes are comparable to a magazine for the content that you learn about and that you get to see. So please do become a patron, and every patron makes a big difference to us. So, and thank you so much to the wonderful viewers who have made this show possible by becoming patrons. So cheers to you.
Yeah.
I hope one day you might get to taste the Nitwit beer.
Yep.
So very soon you're going to get a tour of Crystal's shop during the interview, and you will really see that you can spend literally hours in it. We developed a habit of just popping in to say hello to Crystal every time we got a coffee, which was every day. It was really hard to actually leave because she has so many of her designs made in ready wear, so you can literally spend hours just looking through the shop and just looking at all her colours and how she uses them. So that's coming up. So naturally, both Andrew and I came back with a Crystal Seyfarth design. So this is the one that I'm going to do. It's a recent design that came out earlier this year and was inspired by Crystal's trip to New York. So it's called the Urban Flower Garden Jacket, and you'll actually see me wearing a ready-made version of it in the interview. And I just think they're all my favourite colours. They're perfect colours for me, and I just love everything about the design. And I don't even think I'll modify any of it at all.
Dolls.
Yeah, that's radical.
You're disturbing us here.
So here's all the lovely colours in the box, and I've never actually knitted anything in brown before. Brown does suit me, but I've never actually knitted in brown.
Yep, that's interesting, isn't it?
So that's going to be fun. Okay, and Crystal actually gave me this design, and she offered one to Andrew as well. And at first we were going to do the what is it? It's the fair old Prince of Wales jumper for it, which is the man's jumper. But then my eye just kept going back to this one design that I thought was so stunning of hers. And so this is it here. It's called Pieces, and obviously it's a female jacket, but I'm totally in love with the fabric design. I love her use of colours and the shapes and how they're sort of asymmetrical.
Quite random.
Yeah. And they're all great colours that would just look really good on Andrew. So I think the jacket itself is really beautiful as a female design, but I would like to change the pattern into a vest for Andrew. So we've bought the smaller kit, which should be enough for me to make a vest. And so I'll probably design it, and maybe you'll knit it, or maybe I'll just do the tricky bits and you knit the middle bit in the round.
Yeah, some sort of a collaboration.
We'll see how it goes. I hope I'm successful, because if I can successfully make it into a vest, I think it'd be totally stunning.
I'm sure you'll manage that.
We'll see. We'll see.
Yeah.
Okay, it's much easier to do a pattern that's not stranded in a vest. That's very simple.
That's true. You've got to get all the edges right.
Yeah, I don't think I've ever made anything up with a fair old ribbing or anything like that. So I want to get that looking really good, and I want to do a nice modern high neck V. So I've got to figure out how to do that, but that could be really interesting. Okay, so since we've both got a Crystal Seyfarth project, we thought we should start a Crystal Seyfarth knit-along. So this knit-along is going to start on the 1st of October. So any project of Crystal's that you start on the 1st of October or later can be entered. And she does have a wide range of patterns. She's probably got about 200 designs. Most of them, I have to say, are stranded knitting. She does have a couple that are plain knitting. She's got a traditional Fanø Ganzi, which looks fairly easy to knit. If you're a garment knitter, you shouldn't have a problem with it. The patterning on it is fairly simple, but it's really classy looking. So that's an option.
Yep.
So I think there's something almost, unless you're a complete beginner, there should be a project for almost anybody. So if you're quite an advanced knitter, you could try one of her really extravagant coats or jackets. Or if you are less confident with garment knitting or stranded knitting, you could try one of her shawls. She's got very big shawls, but she's also got smaller cowls. And what's really good about these shawls and cowls is that obviously you want to get the right gauge that the pattern recommends so that you don't run out of yarn and that you get a really lovely fabric. But you can feel really confident that you knit it up, and at the end, you're going to look beautiful in it. It will fit you, because it doesn't matter if it's 3 centimeters too big or too small. It's a shawl. You won't notice it. So that can be a very comforting thing to know if you're tackling a big project. So I hope a lot of you decide to take on this caul as experience, maybe to improve your stranded knitting. I've done, for patrons, you'll find I've done quite in-depth tutorials on how to do two-handed ferrule, weaving in the ends, weaving in the floats on both hands, on the knit side, and if you're purling, Crystal rarely puts stranded purling in her design, so you don't have to worry about that. And there's lots of steeking tutorials there too. And you can find those tutorials.
If you go to our website at fruityknitting.com, there's a link to the tutorial index there.
Yeah.
It's really handy.
Yeah. So that's available for you as comfort and something to hold on to if you're a little bit more nervous about it. So as an incentive, Crystal is offering Fruity Knitting patrons a 10% discount off all her kits and yarn, which you can buy from her web shop. And her web shop is in English and Danish. So just make sure that you click on the English flag at the top of the page if you're an English speaker. Now, we both had a really wonderful time in Denmark, but I had a particularly great time because I've actually got Danish heritage, and it was so interesting for me to hear about the strong maritime culture on Fanø. And the maritime culture is the lifeblood of Fanø and its culture. It is so strong. And my grandfather, who was born in 1905, was actually born in a small Danish town called Assens, which had a large port. And when he was 15, he went to sea, became a sailor, and over the next couple of years, or next few years, he travelled around the world twice on a sailing ship. And so when he's really young still. Yep. And then he went back to school and he became got his Masters of Sail and his Masters of Steam, which apparently back then was fairly rare. In the end, he became the Harbour Master of Port Adelaide in Australia. So I knew a little bit about my heritage, but not that much. And I knew if I started to talk about it, people in Denmark would naturally say, well, where's your family from? And it would be shameful if I couldn't say that. So I emailed my dad, and he very obligingly, very quickly sent me back a whole heap of photos and history. And the photos are great. So I just want to show you a couple of them now. So here's a picture of my grandfather as a young man. Now, on the left, he's at the wheel of a ship, and on the right, he's one of the men working on the rigging. And I just think they're fantastic photos. Here's a picture of him as a little boy with his siblings. And again, I think he's got such an amazing face. He's got these big ears and this funny long nose. And I remembered him as, as my grandfather with massive ears and a long, thin nose. Here's another photo of him with his parents and his siblings. And what my father also told me was that my great-grandfather was also a musician and singer like me, which was really cool to find out. And he was also involved a lot in amateur theatre. Now, there is one more picture that I really want to show you because it involves a really interesting story. This guy here is a Danish ancestor of mine who was an aristocrat. And this is where our family tree can be traced back to on the Danish side. So my great-grandmother, times about 5, worked as a maid in an aristocratic family, and the tradition back then was that when an important aristocratic nobleman came to stay at the house, he was given one of the maids to warm his bed, so to speak. So this guy here, whose name is Von Kroch, was given my female ancestor to warm his bed. Now, the custom is that if the maid gets pregnant, because it's all very above board and she did a good service, so to speak, a good local husband was found for her so he could marry her and make the unborn child legitimate. So my female ancestor got pregnant to this nobleman, so she was married off to a local farmer called Olsen. And Olsen is my name before I married Andrew. Obviously in English we just say Olsen, but I've been told over and over again in Denmark it's Olsen.
Yep.
So that's the start of my heritage on the Danish side. I've got a lot of heritage on the Irish side. So that was really interesting. Now, getting back to my grandfather, on the way back to Germany, we decided to take a detour and stop off at Assens and see if we could find my grandfather's house, the house that he grew up in. And we did. We found it. So here's a picture of it. It's this lovely little yellow cottage. And you might notice that on the right-hand side, there's a sign in Danish saying that the house is for sale. So I plucked up some courage and knocked on the door and told the lady that my grandfather grew up in this house and would she mind if we had a look through? And she very kindly agreed. This was really fascinating to just be in this house thinking this is my grandfather was really familiar with this. That was so weird. Yeah. But what's also weird is that the house was so tiny. For nowadays standards, it was fine for one person to live comfortably. But back then, it was a family of 6, so 4 kids and 2 adults. But back then, also what was different is that kids didn't stay in the house and play. At the beginning of the day, they were told to go out and entertain themselves on the streets. And this was also interesting because this cottage is right in the old part of Assens. So when you go out the front door, you're on a cobbled street and you turn right. You can just walk down a couple of houses. You turn left and you're a stone's throw away from the harbour. And the harbour in Assens back in that time was a major port. It had a lot of international ships, sailing ships coming in. So there would have been a lot of international sailors and wharfies working there. And of course, a young boy is going to hang out there all day.
Yeah.
It is so obvious. Yeah. And that just it gave me a shiver just to be walking down this pathway and think, God, my grandfather would have done this every day as a child, and he would have gone down there and hung out. And he's actually written his memoirs, and I'm ashamed to say I haven't finished reading them. But one thing I do remember him writing about was that he started smoking a pipe at the age of 7. He never stopped. And he lived to about 84.
Yeah.
So it's a pretty good innings, isn't it?
Yeah.
So,
and that was sure to have happened down at the harbour.
Yeah, definitely. But so I'm really intrigued now to read his memoirs because they start in his memories as a small boy. Mm. But it's so obvious. Of course, he was going to get the sailing blood.
Yeah.
Yeah.
It's amazing. It is really just around the corner.
Yeah.
Which is quite not that unusual in Denmark. It is just a whole lot of islands. So.
Yeah. Okay, thanks for spending time with us.
Yeah, I hope you enjoyed our company. We've certainly enjoyed having you here.
And coming up now is Crystal's interview, which you'll really enjoy.
We'll see you in the next episode.
Bye.
Bye.
Welcome to Fruity Knitting. I'm here with Crystal Seyfarth in her shop, which is in the village of Nordby on the island of Fanø in Denmark. We first interviewed Crystal Seyfarth back in episode 85, and our viewers loved meeting Crystal and seeing her very unique designs, very unique and beautiful designs. And although Crystal did show and talk about several of her designs during the interview, we did get requests from many viewers to see and hear more about all of the other garments which we only saw a glimpse of in the background. Well, I am thrilled to finally be in the shop in person with Crystal so she can show us more of her designs and also give us a tour of the shop. So Crystal, we are so grateful that you're so welcoming to us, both on the island and in your shop, so thank you.
It's a privilege to have you here, so
Good.
I'm very thrilled about it.
So since our first interview, you have released some new designs which were inspired by your trip to New York. Mm-hmm. And I think I'm wearing one of them. So can you start and tell us about them?
Yes. Well, being in New York is, of course, an explosion of impressions. But there was one thing that I particularly liked in New York, and that was the urban gardens. So I thought that I would do something do a design, and the thing was, how do I put all these impressions together in one jacket? So the jacket that you were wearing was the first one I made, and what I'm trying to show in that jacket is that all the long stripes here are the avenues or the skyscrapers, or anyway all the very straight lines that you see all over New York City. And then the urban gardens, I had to put in somewhere. Yeah. So that became the cuffs and the upper part of the jacket. So I thought that I combined everything in that jacket. So I thought it was, or I do think it's a pretty jacket. I like it very much because it both has the floral thing and then the very straight graphic lines.
Yeah, it's beautiful. And this is another version here.
Yes, more strong colored, of course. And if you see, this is one of the things that I like to do about all my designs, is that I always put inside facings onto it, and the pipings as well. So and inside the cuffs here also.
Okay, so that's an I-cord bind-off.
Yes, yeah. No, it's not. No. It's actually a band because these are I have to hide the cut stitches or the stick stitches. As everything I do is knitted in the round. So you might as well play with that as well and do it interesting. So for those two jackets, I have chosen to make them striped as well.
Can we turn this around a bit and see the back? That shows you clearly.
And you see how the sleeves are sort of set in like this, which I think the shape of the jacket is really quite simple. But in order just to give it some, to make it look a little more interesting, I like to do the set-in sleeves because that makes the back a little narrower. Yeah. And you can also play with the sleeves, and sometimes you can do something in here. But I haven't done that for that particular model. And also for the neck, I always like to do something extra, so it looks interesting. That was the first jacket that I made straight after I came home from New York. And then I thought I hadn't quite finished with the floral theme and all the impressions that I got from the city. So I wanted to make another jacket, and a little longer one with a little more roomy than the short one. So this is also the urban flower garden jacket, but in a long version. And then I added the statements, which I think is something that we will see quite a lot more of in the future. The world that we live in requires statements, I think. But this is quite harmful. It just says flower power. So there's nothing political about that. Yeah. But also, I like to combine the floral with the graphic, and I think that is been successfully made in this jacket. And then I have added some embroidery to it.
Yes, the center of the flowers.
Yes. And the band here in front, also again, just a few stripes, just to make it not too much, but just a little.
To break it up a little bit.
Yes, to break it up, and again the inside facings.
I love the facings. That makes it so clean, and when it flashes open like
absolutely, that is exactly what I hate. If you don't have the facings, then you would see this. Yeah. And now you can see this, and this is also, you can also play with that and put another color in, or another pattern for that matter. So so that is the long floral jacket.
Can we just turn it around and see the back? Okay, so that's beautiful. Yeah. I do like, these are sort of softer colours here with the strong arms. The strong black and white looks lovely.
This is, I think it's important to make a contrast. If you want to do something like this, you make it visible with a proper contrast. So these sleeves, it wouldn't look the same if the background was black, for instance. Yeah. So the sleeves stick out in some way and makes it look interesting. Okay. And then I added just a an amber button. So it's a local touch to it as well.
Yes,
from
because
the island.
I think the man who makes these buttons collects the amber on the beaches.
Beach. Yes, yes. So we have lots of amber here on the island. So it's the international inspiration and a bit local.
It's gorgeous. Okay, and then this is a variation, isn't it?
Yes, it is. I usually make both a shawl and a jacket from the same pattern. And what is wonderful about the shawls is that you have a very big surface. So the colors and the patterns really fold themselves out. And if we take this off, you can see how the flowers really
it's beautiful.
stand out here. And again, the border with the flower power
that's really
statements on
beautiful. It looks
Yeah.
great, the rows of flowers like that.
So this is something that I have begun to do lately to embroider on my designs, just to add just a little extra color. And then I don't like to knit with 3 colors at the time, so I choose to just to embroider on, and again here up in the
And that's
border.
a duplicate stitch, isn't it? But you're putting it over in the same way so it looks like it's knitted.
Absolutely, that's I don't know what it's called in English, but that's how I do it. Yeah, and it's quite easy to embroider that way, and it really makes a difference.
And you've got pom-poms here. I don't know if the viewers can see that at the end. That's super cute.
Yeah.
And at the ends. Okay, that's gorgeous. Well, I absolutely love this design. I love everything about it. I think the colour combination is just stunning. It's totally my colours. I love the shape of it. And I think it looks really great over this white blouse. So I think this is going to be my next Crystal Safe Earth project. And I know that the viewers are going to be a little bit cross with me if I don't ask you to talk about all of the garments on the rack behind. So we'll go and do that now.
Okay. I'd like to show you some designs which are especially influenced and inspired by the houses here on the island. And that is all the tile walls that you find in the houses. Those tiles were brought back on the ships from Holland, and they would balance the ship in the very rough North Sea when they sailed back to the island. Then they would put up the tiles on the walls in the houses. And today they are real collector's items because if you want to buy a house on the island, you check first if there are many tiles in the house because they're very valuable today. But one day I was on a flea market. I found just one single tile, which was hand painted, and it just had this motif. And I immediately knew that it had been part of a bigger wall picture where all the tiles were put together. So I thought that I wanted to knit that. So I knitted this one here. So this is the entire tile wall, so to speak. And I think it would have looked lovely in one of the small houses. What I chose to do was that I only knit with 2 colors at the time. And try to avoid a third color. And if I have a third color, I try to embroider it. So there are parts on this one here, on this poncho, where I have 2 colors already, so I embroider just parts of it and do not knit it. And then I like to add a little extra color. And for this particular design, I have also embroidered this one here, the border. So this is one of the tile motifs that I have in my designs. I have a few others, like this one here. That would be a regular tile wall with the flowers on the tiles. They were quite common. But you could also find tiles with biblical motifs, which are extremely valuable. But this would be a typical tile wall in an old house. And then again, I like to add a striped border because it sort of frames it in. Another tile wall has become to this shawl, which is one of the first tile designs that I made. they were mostly blue, the tiles, but you could find other colors. This one is, the tile that I found for this design had these colors exactly. So you could find some other colors as well. So tiles are always an inspiration source to me. Then I'll move on and show you another shawl, which is a damask lily shawl. Well, I picture that this could be a shawl that a Fanø woman she would have. She wouldn't wear it, but it would probably have been a gift for her from her husband, who had been sailing to the Far East, for instance, or to China, and he would have bought her a silk shawl. But she was a practical woman, so she wouldn't wear it, but she would show it off. So I think, this is my interpretation anyway, that it could be a shawl like this. Very fine and very bright colors. And then again framed in with this very wide border. And then I have another design. While talking about the sailors traveling all over the world, they would bring back all kinds of textiles, and especially silk for the women's dresses here on the island. But they would also go to China and to Japan, for instance, and they would stumble over very vivid designs from the silks and the kimonos. This is a design for a stole that I made last year. I believe that I would have been a kimono with a big flower like that. And you can then wrap it around you, either with this side here in the front or with this, and then you will have the flower here inside shown like this when you are wearing it. So many of my designs are inspired by the cultural history here on the island, but also the outlook that the sailors had here. I'm from a sailor's family myself, so when I was a little child, my grandfather and uncles, my father, they brought back all kinds of things from the big world outside, and it was just a natural thing to have China. We had China long before anyone else had that in their homes, because they were brought back by the sailors. So we were used to looking at bright patterns and also the influence from the outside. As I said before, when I make a jacket, I often make a coat as well. The iCat stole that I showed you just before with the big flower on, actually originally was a coat looking like this. Again, with the inside facings having another pattern to make it look more interesting when you're wearing it. This is one color combination. I have another one. The same, but looks very, very different. I'll show you this one here. I like to do the pipings because you can add them to something which is quite simple and make it look quite different and interesting. This one here is knit in squares actually. This one here is a square. On the side, if you can see that, there's a triangle and again a square in the front. Of course, it's all knitted together in the round, but that's how it's constructed. So to give this coat a little more width, I put in the triangle instead of increasing and decreasing. That's how I play with the shapes. And then I add the border afterwards and the pipings here in the sleeves. And this is just a band that I have knitted and sewn it into the middle of the jacket. So the back doesn't look very wide, but sort of divides it. And this is, I don't do many dresses, but this is a dress that I quite like. The idea behind this one here is that now that the older I get, I sort of look at my life in a different way. And what I'm been trying to show here is that life is, when you live life and you're young, you have various experiences with your life, and you might not think that they give any meaning to you. Why did I experience that, or why did that happen to me? But the older you get, it sort of all gets together in one perfect piece. So you see all the different pieces here added to one piece, and I think it all makes sense to you at the end. Then I have a jacket which is one of my favorite jackets, actually. That is the Caledonia jacket. And I made various designs with called them all Caledonia. I really didn't know why until I was invited to Scotland. And I became the owner and the organizer of knitting festival in Inverness in Scotland. And they invited me for a meeting before that to the area Caledonia in Scotland. And suddenly all my designs here made sense to me. So I thought, well, I must have known without knowing that I was going to Caledonia. So these have been very popular designs. This little Caledonia jacket. Again, I add a totally different color also for the back. Here you see it in another color combination with green facings. And one which I like very much myself is the red one here. And then I put black to it, so it looks nice also with the color in the back. And everything that I do is knitted in the round with steeking. The front and the sleeves, and sometimes I do designs that I have to steek, cut up in order to just knit a few centimeters and more, add the steeking again and continue. I'm a lazy knitter. That's why I always do steeking. And it's so much more fun to knit these intrigue patterns when you only have to knit them from the right side. And this is another jacket. It's called the Flora jacket, a little longer. And again, a stripe border just to frame in all the birds and the flowers. Again, lovely blue colors. This one here, the cobalt blue, is a very typical Scandinavian color, the very bright blue. And the same jacket, just in purple. They look like two totally different designs. Well, what else do I have? Well, this one here is my star sweater. I really love the strong lime color. This is the color, my favorite color. Actually, it's an alpaca color that I found many years ago, and I just bought the entire stock of this color because it's out of stock now. But especially this lime color makes everything look brighter when you combine it with all the turquoise colors and light green colors. So I think this is a beautiful color. I don't do many male designs, mostly because most husbands, they like color, but when it comes to wearing them, they say, no, I'd rather have just a blue or a dark gray. But if I have to look back at the history here on the island, the sailors, they went all over the world. So they dressed from the fashion that they met outside the world, whereas the women here would wear their traditional costume. And I made this Fair Isle sweater a couple of years ago because I pictured that the sailor from the island here, he would have a sweater like this. He had been in Scotland and he had bought a nice sweater there and he would be wearing it and bringing it back to the island. This is not a knitter's island, really. So they would probably have thought that that was really a pretty sweater. Probably not in red at those times, but in blue, I would guess. Talking about blue, I made an exhibition at the Art Museum last year here on the island, and I thought that I was missing one design, so I really quickly knitted this sweater. Something about where the ocean and the sky was all put into one design. So this is, I call it the sea light sweater, and it was really never meant to be anything else but just a piece for this exhibition. But I fell in love with it because I love the blue colors. So it's very easy design, very straightforward in all ways, but the colors make this sweater just especially stunning, I think. So these are some of the designs that I just have picked out for you now, and I think I'd love to show you my shop. I'm totally influenced by the costumes and the cultural history here on the island. Today, most women here have their own costume still, and we wear it for special occasions, for birthdays, for christenings, for weddings, and so on. And it's wonderful that the tradition is still kept. We also have our own music and our own dances. A year ago, I made an exhibition where we photographed all the costumes on the island and put them in the correct settings as it had been 200 years ago. And here are some of the pictures from it, and we also made a book and a very large exhibition. This picture is very typical for an all-day, everyday situation on the island. This woman here in the middle, she's a captain's wife, and she has just come home from, she sailed with her husband often, and she's just come home from Marseille in France, and all the neighbors are coming in just to hear gossip about, hey, what's happened on the ship, and because they all had sons or uncles and husbands on board the same ships. And they are having coffee and having a good chat, and as you can see, they're all very interested in what she has to tell them. What is very special about the costume on Fanø is that you're always wearing a scarf around your head. Just one occasion you will not be wearing the scarf, and that is on your wedding day. This is a young girl in her cotton cloth that she wraps around her head. Has to be done correctly, and it's very difficult to do it today because not many are used to do it today. And here you see another picture. Here she's wearing her silk scarf. She's going out for a party. And this lady here, she's a widower. This island was called the Widower's Island because 70% of the sailors drowned. So when she made her wedding dress, the skirt she was wearing was black, and that was the one that she would wear when she became a widow, because that was for certain that she would be. And she would also be buried in that skirt. And the widower, she would be wearing purple blue, almost black scarves around her head, and so would her costume be. So this exhibition was quite beautiful, and I'm very pleased that I made it. It has nothing to do with knitting, but again, this is what my inspiration comes from, and I thought it was a necessity to make it. And you'll meet some of the people who helped me with this. Kiss from the costumes that you will meet later on. She was one of the organizers together with me. This cape is called Havila Cape. in 1917, there was a very big sailing ship with lots of sailors from the island on board the ship, which came from Buenos Aires in South America on its way back to Europe, and it was sunk by a German U-boat. On board were all these Fanø sailors, and when the word came back to the island that they were all saved and picked up by other ships, the relief here on the island was tremendous. So I pictured that they were preparing a feast for the sailors coming back home to the island again. And while doing that, the Fanø women would be wearing this cape just to keep warm. They had isolated houses, so it was cold wandering around. So I designed this one. It's called Cape Havila, due to this very special sailing ship with the Fanø sailors on board. When you buy a pattern from me, I usually sell pattern. I only sell pattern and wool together as a knit kit. I have all the right colors are in it and the various amounts that you need for the specific design. So you get a box like this with a pattern, and then you can just start knitting. This is what I prefer to do it that way. Not that you cannot choose your own colors, but I prefer really not to make any other combinations. When you are mixing 12, 15, 20 colors, you must be sure that you know what you're doing, and it would take some sample knitting before you are you're just certain about that. I only do colored, multicolored designs, but there is one design which is just a plain design with texture, and that is the Fanø Ganzi, which is a modern Ganzi, which I designed together with a Ganzi expert from Holland. We found some very old Ganzis up on the West Coast, and we altered them and made a new design. So we would think that this is how a Fanø Ganzi would look like if he had been wearing one. But also fun to make with the texture, so just not plain knitting. Here's the Fair Isle sweater that I was telling you about before. And again, some of my designs, small packages with the right amounts of wool. This is the part of my shop which I particularly love. This is my playground, and I have, I suppose, about 150 different colors. It's all Scottish lamb's wool. In my shop, you can only buy one quality. And this is because this is the best quality. The colors are melange colors. They blend fantastic together. You can wash it in the washing machine. You can damp it with full damp, and you can. It doesn't peel. So it really is a terrific quality. So I stick to that. So that's just one quality here. 150 colors, I suppose I have, and I mix them in all kinds of ways. As a customer, you can come into my shop and you can ask for 30, 40, 50 grams of all the colors, whatever you like, and we will roll it up for you. And this is where we also do our knit kits, and we are, I think that we are, this year we have been packing more than 3 tons of wool for knit kits. So these machines are very, very busy. And many customers come here also if they have an idea themselves, and they just need to finish up the designs by picking the colors. They can pick from here, and we will roll up whatever you need. Another design named after a big sail ship here on the island is the ship Sixtus, which did not have such a dramatic history as the Havila Cape. But here, the Sixtus cowl is just made in one piece, knitted in the round, with the front and a pattern like this, and striped on the back. So when you turn it around and wear it, you can see both the stripes and the front. And this is a nice small project. If you're not so familiar with the Fair Isle knitting, I always suggest that you start with a smaller project like this. It could also be the Sixtus hat. I have written 2 books, knitting books, not ordinary knitting books, but both a description of the inspiration sources, my life on the island, something about the cultural history, and then a lot of designs inspired by the island. This is the one was made in 2017, and the first one is sold out, unfortunately, but anyway, this is my favorite, so I'm glad that I still have that one. When I opened my business or the shop here 15 years ago, I never thought of selling my designs as ready-mades. Since they are handmade, it takes about 200 hours to knit a shawl, so I could never make a living out of knitting for my customers. So 10 years ago, I was so lucky that I was introduced to a company in Sri Lanka, actually founded by a Norwegian family who needed Norwegian sweaters to be knitted up. And they taught these knitters to do the Norwegian sweaters. But over the years, they broadened out the customers. So they're knitting for big fashion houses today and for me here on Fanø. And these knitters, I have about 60 knitters who once a year in a 3 months' time just knit my designs. So I send out hundreds of kilos of wool and the patterns in English and a sample of each design that I want to have knitted for this year. And then all the wool is distributed to the various centers on Sri Lanka, and the women are sitting there knitting, making their own money, and the children are being taken care of. And I know that I have been supporting new roofs after storms in Sri Lanka and computers for the girls and so on. So it's a totally win-win situation where they make me extremely happy because they are so skilled. I never ever in 10 years got one piece back which was not in order. It's so nicely made, and sometimes I have to argue with my customers whether it's machine made or not. It's handmade. So I have almost sold out now, so I'm ready now in 4 weeks to ship out all the wool again for next year's designs to be made up. And finally, I'd like to point out just one design that I'm really thrilled with, and that is my pieces jacket. And the inspiration to this one came from the ikat weaving, which you see often in Chinese and Japanese kimonos. And the trick was to make the colors look like they would fade out and then come strong back again, as if they were woven into the fabric. But I think I succeeded in doing it. I certainly hope you think that as well. But as you see, the colors, they come out strong and then they fade away. And I really like this design. It's so graphic and simple. And then I just chose to have one color facing nothing else. So it was just a pattern that would stand out on this jacket.
So Crystal, whilst we're in Fanø, we would really like to capture some of the island's highlights for our viewers to see. So what are the sights and experiences that you think we definitely shouldn't miss?
Well, we have a wonderful nature and the beach, but this you can find all over the world actually. So what I'd like you to see is our little museum, which shows a captain's home. This is a sailor's island, and the culture here on the island is quite spectacular, especially because of the costumes, but also the way of life. So the museum is a must. And then I encourage you to walk in the streets of Nordby and Sønderho, where you see all the old houses with the thatch roofs, and you sort of get an idea of what it was like to be a seaman's wife and living there alone years when he was out sailing. So the museum, the costumes, the houses, and of course in the beach, which is the widest beach in northern Europe, which is quite amazing also.
It is, and people drive their cars up and down, don't they?
Right, yes they do. And our guests, they start saying, no, I don't think we will drive the beach, but we do that, even the bus drives there. It's a very wide beach. But also, you know, get the sort of get to know a little about the history here on the island, because then you will walk around and have a totally different feeling of the place.
Yeah, there are absolutely stunning houses here, and the doorways are quite short on the really old ones, aren't they?
Yes, they are.
It shows you how small previous generations were.
Yeah.
Yeah. Okay, well, we will definitely get a lot of good footage of that to show you, because I'm sure you'll be thrilled to see it. And we are also really appreciative that we could be in the shop and have a tour and see all the fantastic garments behind us. So thank you so much.
Well, thank you for coming.
Good. Okay, bye.